Our bodies are so vulnerable. We're not in a very secure state, right? Anything could happen to us. And so because of that, existential dread is far more normal than even people realize. Many of us have lived with existential dread before. And so existential dread is kind of like anxiety on steroids. Because at least with anxiety, we can either point to something or we can regard the anxiety as being some form of tangibility or knowing behind it. But with existential dread, it's far more invisible and it's far more omnipresent because it's happening at such a subtle level that even the existential dread itself feels very elusive. And so it's oppressive, but then also elusive. Because, like I said, it's like taking place at this like subtle level of existence. And it's a lot to unpack, which is why when people experience existential dread, it's mainly through some sort of like paralysis, some sort of paralysis of the willpower. That's a huge theme with existential dread. It's just where we feel like our willpower is oppressed and locked and we can't really do anything, or what's the point of doing something, or what's the point of existence itself, all these different layers and questions that come with it. But then also things are linked to existential dread that we normally wouldn't link at all, like unexplainable grief and even unexplainable rage. So it can really take any shape or form, but what it has in common is that it's coming from this overwhelming, crushing sense of a larger picture. And so that's why, one, it's not really helpful telling people who have existential dread that don't seek answers. That's kind of ridiculous, especially since the aim for many strong spirits here and evolved spirits here is to grow and evolve. And so it's this beautiful and delicate alchemy and balance of seeking truth while also at the same time allowing ourselves to seep deeper in to the emotional insecurity and the emotional uncertainty that is a natural part of the human experience. The human experience in and of itself is vulnerable in every single way possible. Our bodies are so vulnerable. And so this is also a clue as to the assignment or even the lessons and curriculum here, because we're not in a very secure state, even at a bodily level, right? Anything could happen to us, and immortality is almost seeming like it's on the other end of every bend. And so because of that, existential dread is far more normal than even people realize. It's even, dare I say, kind of like a rite of passage, because think about it. If a person isn't experiencing some sort of internal cataclysm that leads towards having questions, like, who am I? Why am I here? What is this? You'd almost have to go into like a very deep state of numbness. And so that's why the best healers ever, it doesn't matter what field they're in, are not going to shame a person or try to shut down their self-inquiry or their world inquiry. So it's great to point out where we need over-security and why that is such a block and an issue to a person being able to embrace their own vulnerability and their own insecurity. That's vital, but at the same time, trying to blunt that impulse is not going to do anything, and it's not helpful. That impulse will always arise because we're in an age of spiritual awakening. So all it will do is really just make a person go deeper into existential dread. So I'm going to share with you guys today how I healed my existential dread, because I think that this is something that many people can benefit from. And I think that it's also so obscure that sometimes we might hear helpful practices or exercises, but still not be able to get to like the core of how to truly integrate this large, oppressive, suppressive, repressive, overwhelming picture, worldview, and how that puts us ourselves deeper and deeper into layers of paralysis. So I pretty much always had existential dread my whole life. I just didn't have the words for it. I always had almost this like French philosopher way of understanding and sensing a universe that was far less tangible than elementary school or just the world around me. And so it wasn't until really I started going through a deep spiritual awakening about like what's going on inside this reality that it was almost a sense of peace just by having the confirmation that we are inside an environment and a reality that is presenting itself one way, while it's also very unnatural, very unhealthy, and pretty much cultivated and sustained by programming and conditioning. So none of it was healthy. And that will also lead our intuition to sensing some form of existential dread. When we know this, but we just don't really understand that that's a symptom of this way that our reality is set up and what reality at this level is. But it wasn't until like I would say 7 years ago that I started then producing a new type of way that the existential dread was showing up, because I had peace for a long time, because I was awakening. So with that, I had a lot of life force with inquiry. I was curious about this, or I was curious about this. I was learning about this. I was experiencing this. So my existential dread had outlets. It had creative outlets. But then it showed up in a new way. I'd say about, like I said, 7 years ago. And how it showed up was it would wake me up in the middle of the night with like a panic of total grief and sadness for my loved ones. And so that's just the symbol it was representing. And so when I started to really sink and immerse myself deep into this, what I saw was that the loved ones would then morph into what it was really representing, which is like this existential insecurity. And that insecurity we could look at as an inner child. And so even though there's a divine child, and the inner child isn't just one thing, it's not just like this record of sadness, it's more than that. But how it wanted to show itself to me was as this one aspect of the inner child, because the inner child is multidimensional. And so it showed up as the inner child of infinity. That's the best way I could describe it. It was almost like the aspect of my energy field and soul that felt utterly alone and just moving through infinity, moving through all of eternity alone. And it felt, because of that, very afraid. And the reason why I distinguishedly am calling it like the inner child is because of how it felt so alone. Because if it was like the inner adult, it would not take on that sense of it being like in need. It would not take on the sense of it needing to be united with myself. So that's why it's different than other archetypes within our own energy field. And that's why it mainly belongs to the domain of the inner child. It's because it needs an inner adult. And so how this inner child, once I started being woken up in the middle of the night from deep existential grief is loss, by the way. So a person experiencing grief is a person experiencing a sensation and an experience of loss, disconnection, not being with something. So if it's coming through as grief, and then from there a panic, that was my inner child now. I had determined over time that what it wanted was to be held from traveling through eternity. And so there's different layers of healing, and there's different dimensions that were really healing. And this one was at a very deep, or we could look at a very high dimension. So it wasn't something from this life. Sometimes we like to think everything comes from this life. Many things come from this life, not everything. And sometimes we will create a lifetime just to be able to heal things that are not from this lifetime. So that doesn't mean that we're perfect. We still all have things to heal from this lifetime, some more than others, but not everything comes from this lifetime. And sometimes we need a lifetime just to unpack, just to help heal and take a break from other things that our soul has experienced. And so at this level, it was a high enough dimension to be like, unpack eternity. Unpack this level now. Almost like taking something off of the burners that was in the back burners, because now room has been cleared to address it and to embrace it and integrate it. And so what I ended up doing was connecting so deeply with this aspect of myself that I was showing myself as an inner child, and that mainly what specifically this aspect needed from me was to have connection through infinity. It felt like, once again, like all the sensations and experience of a child versus an adult. And so that would be panic. Like, what do I do? I'm going through infinity. What do I do? I'm literally going really fast into eternity. And I mentioned that inside my video, the cosmic role of the inner child. So if you want to have additional information about this level of the inner child, you can watch that video. But every time I would be woken up by this really strong panic and sense of deep grief, I would then visualize that it was my inner child communicating to me what I had discovered throughout having this experience before. And so I got better and better at it every time it would wake me up. And so what I would do is then start to fully feel everything she wanted me to feel, which was all of the panic of her going through time, infinity, eternity, alone, going through all of this expansion, because we're here and we start off at a compressed state and then we decompress. And that's kind of like we fractal out. We just start literally turning into a butterfly here. And so that expansive process is really sometimes, almost all of the time, going to start off with a destabilization. And so what I was doing was really allowing her to, through me, feel all of that panic of going through all of time really fast and going like, what is going on? Like, why am I here? Because remember, this aspect does not have vital information about existence. So it's like a lot of confusion or just not knowing as well. And so before we give knowing to this aspect, for anyone who has struggled or is struggling with existential dread, before we give any piece of knowing, we first need to fully feel that experience of like, you're in a human form. This is so utterly vulnerable, and it's set up to be that way by design. Just like how a seed is all vulnerable, but then it turns into like a giant oak tree. And so then once that started to really not only become integrated, the panic and the grief, the next element was like utter non-judgmentalness for how long I would have to do this. And this is where I would say mainly people falter and fumble. We go into something, whatever it is, if it's a practice or an exercise or even just a path, with some sort of predetermined expectation to anticipate how long is this going to take. And what I did second was give it however long, and it wasn't up to me, and I was not in control for how much I'd be woken up in the middle of the night, because by this time it was happening like 2 to 3 times a week. And I was not concerned about that. So you give up having a time about something. And that allows you actually to go deeper into sincerity. And the universe loves sincerity. The inner child loves sincerity. Like the whole multiverse loves sincerity. I would even go so far as to say, like, what's the point to everything? Everything, like the largest picture, it would just be like, just an experiment on sincerity. I swear to you, that's how much sincerity is like so vital. That we could look at everything as just like an experiment at the highest degree on sincerity. And so that's the second thing. So you just, I know it's not easy, but you give up that there's a time frame of, will I ever not feel panic? Will I ever not feel grief? And I promise you that if a person truly is relaxing into the uncertainty of however long it will take, and all of their energy is now being freed up from expectation and judgments of how long it should take into now just being the loving awareness to this aspect of ourselves. Then the paradox of that is all of a sudden the inner child or the aspect of us that has to brunt the hardest parts of life, of existence, will then feel that it won't really matter if we're going into eternity and infinity and all of that, because the inner child is now with a safe adult. I hope that makes sense. And so even the inner child, the aspect of us that is bearing the brunt of all of the WTF will be able to go, oh, I'm with a safe adult, so I don't have to hold it alone. So it's okay if I don't know. It's okay if I have answers, and it's okay if I don't. And it's okay if I'm growing and becoming, and the answers will come later. Because we fall sometimes into like a polarization, like you don't need any answers, and then like I need all the answers. And the true answer is in between those. It's like maybe they'll come at a later date if I'm just doing the best I can now, and if I'm being present now. So why this is also important is for the third step. And the third step out of this, which is how I healed my existential dread, was I would talk to it like I was a stage 5 clinger. And this is so important. You have to think of the most clingiest things ever, and then say those to your inner child. If, once again, you're going through existential dread, you have to be so stage 5 clinger that it might even cringe the inner child. The inner child doesn't cringe, but you understand my point. It's that you have to say very clingy things that will give it over security. So what I would say was things I was like, I will be with you forever, for all of eternity. It will be you and me. And I love you. You are the apple of my eye. You are all of my entire reality. And I love you forever. And we will be together forever. And I just go on trying to think of the most clingiest things to say. Now, obviously, if we're speaking this way and then none of our actions follow through, like we can't feel what is being brought up as well, then there's going to be like a schism there. So we're going to need to also make sure that when we're doing this, that we're also not just saying it and then oscillating back into like being the own inner child to our inner child. Because then our inner child goes like, I have to parent you. So it's really important to be able to interact with this aspect from that stage 5 clinger ability to connect with and embrace and integrate our inner child. But also, I would just say make sure that you have some level of sincerity going on with your ability to truly be there for your inner child. Just making sure that there's some level of congruency. That's going to be really important. So take that how it resonates, apply it how you will, whatever congruency means to you. So I ended up doing this for a few months until the whole issue itself started to dissipate. And it has not come back since then, but I'm still not giving this the full-blown kind of like stamp of like, it's cured or whatever, because even that would be disrespectful to the actual thing itself. And there's many things where that's not disrespectful at all. If you've healed something and it's healed and it's cured, great. But I'm just talking about this because this almost makes it sound like it's not an inner child, and instead it's just kind of like this thing that is, I don't know, like marketed or something. And that's not the point. The point is, if it comes back, I'll still be there for it. So the point isn't to just go like, it's done, it's rid. Instead, it's about like, it's integrated and it's not an issue. It hasn't been an issue for a very long time. And there's even been a lot of great manifestations, a lot of great quality of life in its place now. And so why this is so important is because sometimes when there's such a large and invisible issue, it almost seems out of our capacity. And that's when our willpower goes into paralysis and we just kind of check out. And what this is about is really allowing you to see through my experience that something that large, something that vague, it can totally be unpacked. We just need to fractal out. I hope this has helped you fractal out. Make sure to subscribe to my channel for higher dimensional guidance through spiritual awakening. See you next time.